Hello and welcome, friends, to this again different type of video. I thought today that it would be fun to rank Roman emperors, and of course this would take far too long because, 1500 years of history almost of Roman emperors. So we might do these videos from time to time and pick out a certain time period. And today I will start with the time period where I have, I would say, the highest interest, which is of course the fall of the Western Roman Empire. So when things started going downhill in the Roman Empire, which led up to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. This, I would say, 100-year time span from the 370s to the 470s, okay? And let's just start. I have no idea how long it's going to be, what's going to happen. This is completely unscripted. I might ramble too long again, as sometimes unfortunately happens when I talk about Roman history. So let's start with this Roman Emperor tier list. Here is the tiermaker.com, create Roman ruler, that's the address here. And we have all the Roman emperors here neatly aligned, and we can just start and rank them. And so yeah, I thought it would be fun to start after the reign of Julian, maybe after the reign of Julian, with like Valentinian I. I think Valentinian I is an interesting point to start at because that's when the West was still strong. That is an era where I would say that the Western Roman Empire was in fact stronger than the Eastern Roman Empire, right? I always hear the argument, or very often hear the argument, that the East survived because the East was more powerful, was just better in some ways. But many people forget that in the late 300s, or in the second half of the 300s, the Western Roman Empire was actually stronger, okay? Stronger than the Eastern Roman Empire. And in fact, the Eastern Roman Empire often had to ask the help of the Western Roman Empire in the 300s when the invasion of the Goths started. So from the late 370s, I would say all the way up to the rebellions of the Goths, Tribigild and Gainas in around the year 400. So for more than 20 years, 25 years, about that time span, the Eastern Roman Empire actually had to ask the help of the Western Roman Empire, okay? Many people tend to forget that fact. And so it was not clear that the East would survive and the West would fall. In fact, it's just like an unfortunate series of events that culminated in the West falling. So let's start with this, I would say, time span under Valentinian I, when the West was still stronger than the East, okay? So Valentinian I, okay. I personally have to say, friends, I think Valentinian I was a really good emperor. He was a really good emperor. Now, many people think like, oh, I don't like Christian emperors, or like I'm pro-pagan. I like pagan emperors more than Christian emperors. This is not true, okay? Valentinian I was a Christian emperor, and I think this is how a Christian emperor should be. He was religiously tolerant, first of all, okay? He was religiously tolerant. The intolerance of later emperors, or of his predecessor, for example, like Constantius II, he was not like that, okay? He was religiously tolerant, which I think is a great plus. And under his leadership, the Western Roman Empire achieved the last, I would say, great victories and projected power even into the realm of the Germans, okay? So under Valentinian I, this was the last time that the Western Roman Empire actually still had expeditions into enemy territory. Like the Valentinian I fortified the borders of the Rhine, borders of the Limes fortifications into Germania, okay? He fortified these bulwarks. He built new watchtowers. He built new forts, even into enemy territory in the 370s, okay? Late 360s, early 370s, he still did these things, which is the last time that something like this would happen. Many tend to forget this. Valentinian I was really a great emperor who won important victories against the Germanic invaders, religiously tolerant, strong leader. Of course, he had character flaws. He was like too angry. Okay, he was a bit of a choleric. He was probably going berserk too easy. He was getting angry too easy. And if we can trust that story, how he died, apparently he died while he was outraged at a Germanic delegation. So outraged, so angry that a blood vessel in his brain popped. Okay, that is quite insane. So this shows you what kind of an angry character he sometimes was. Yet still, despite his character flaws, seriously guys, I think he was a great emperor, in my opinion. In my opinion, he was a great emperor, and I wish more Christian emperors would have been like him, religiously tolerant towards the pagans. This might have led to a peaceful coexistence of different religions, how the Roman Empire was always intended to be. The Roman Empire was always I would say like an agglomeration of different belief systems, different cultures, and always religiously tolerant. And so that's why I like Valentinian I as well. Now we come to Valens, his Eastern colleague. Wait, where is he? Here. Now, Valens, unfortunately, will always be remembered because he lost at the Battle of Adrianople, okay? That is like, unfortunately, Valens's legacy, for which he will be always remembered. Like, the guy who lost against the Goths, right? He must have been a terrible emperor. But the crazy thing is, until that point, he was actually a pretty good emperor, okay? He was like, also religiously tolerant, first of all. Like, the reforms, or let's say the religious reforms which the Emperor Julian implemented, were never really revised until quite a later time. So Valens actually and Valentinian I, they just let these laws and they didn't care much about it. They were like, okay, whatever, we have more important stuff to deal with, which was true. They had more important stuff to deal with, like huge Germanic invasions and stuff like that, okay? So they were thinking, let's put this on the back burner. So Valens actually was not such a bad emperor. He won some victories against the Goths initially. He was, as I said, religiously tolerant. He was just a solid emperor until the point where, unfortunately, he lost against the Goths at Adrianople, and that is kind of sad that he will always be remembered for that. And then people say, oh, he was the worst emperor. He was terrible. He was so bad because he lost. Yes, it was not a smart decision to not wait for the reinforcements sent by his Western colleague Gratian. If he would have waited for reinforcements by his Western colleague Gratian, that would have been quite smart, okay? Then they would have achieved probably a resounding victory against the Goths. The Goths would have been crushed. The Goths would have never been allowed to settle within borders of the Roman Empire, and the whole history of the Roman Empire would have gone differently. Alaric would have not sacked Rome, and so on and so forth. Alaric would have not been allowed to settle in Illyricum, and this whole chain reaction of events would have gone differently. So losing at Adrianople certainly was not good, but he also wasn't terrible. I wouldn't put him in terrible. I would put him in poor or mediocre. I'm not sure. Losing against the Goths certainly was really bad, but before losing, he was not extremely bad, okay? He was not extremely bad. So I will put him in mediocre, okay? I'm generous to him. I'm friendly to this guy because in that day and age, until that point, he was not a bad emperor. Until 378, when he lost at Adrianople, he was a solid emperor, and so I will take this into account, okay? I'm really sorry if some people don't agree, but that's just the way I see it. Now, Gratian is also kind of an interesting figure, in my opinion. He was pretty young, but in his young age, he won some pretty impressive victories against the Germanics, okay? He was like a really active emperor who aggressively fought against Germanic invaders. He, I think, won victories against the Alemanni, against different Germanic tribes, and was still able to uphold, the frontier, the border to the Germanic territories, which was not a certain thing in those times, right? So that is when the West was still very strong. And we see now that things go south in the East. So the East is now calling upon help of the West because, you know, things went bad in Adrianople, and Gratian actually wanted to help Valens, but Valens didn't wait for Gratian, and so the disaster of Adrianople happened. But what I don't like about Gratian is that he was religiously very, very intolerant. You know, he was like a hardcore Christian fanatic, as I would say. He had the altar of victory, if I'm not mistaken, removed from the Senate house in Rome. I think this might have happened already earlier under Constantius II, but this is somewhat disputed. But he was not a religiously tolerant guy, okay? He was not religiously tolerant, and he died also pretty young. You know, he died pretty young. I think he lost, if I'm not mistaken, against Magnus Maximus. I'm doing this by heart, okay? I'm doing this by heart, so please don't expect me to know everything. If I'm not mistaken, he lost against the usurper Magnus Maximus, which again was not so good. So I would say he's a mixed bag somehow. He's a mixed bag. I would also put him in mediocre, okay? I would put him in mediocre. Now, Magnus Maximus, the usurper from Britain. My God, Britannia spawning one usurper after another for, I don't know, hundreds of years. Wow, what a mess this was, you know? And Magnus Maximus in himself was maybe not a bad person because he was religiously tolerant, and he just thought that he would be a better ruler. So he invaded, which I cannot be super angry at him because this was just standard practice by that time, okay? Like invading from Britannia, usurping, this was like almost standard practice. I think Magnentius had done this like just a few decades before him. So yeah, but then again, he lost against Theodosius because Theodosius came from the east fighting against Magnus Maximus, defeating him. And so what is his legacy? Like I'm trying to think, like, did he leave something positive to the world? Did he leave something noteworthy, something positive? And I have to say, I cannot find too much. So his legacy is like, yeah, he lost against Theodosius and severely weakened the Western Roman Empire because, you know, the legions from Britannia, which he just like killed for nothing, just for personal gain, they were very hard to replenish in that time. And so he weakened the Western Roman Empire. That's just what the net result of this was. This is when things really start to go downhill for the West, because all those usurpations in the West led to civil wars with the East. And by some chance or luck on part of the East, of course, there was also ability involved. The East won and just freaking crushed the West. And then the West was far worse off after this series of civil wars than the East. And Magnus Maximus really contributed, in my opinion, to that. So even though he was religiously tolerant, I'm sorry, Magnus, but what you did was not cool, man, okay? Your legacy, what you left was basically a weaker Western Roman Empire. So I'm really sorry, even though you had good intentions, but the outcome was really not great, okay? Was really not great. Now, Valentinian II. Okay, this is an interesting character. It's a sad story, actually. He was just a young guy, okay? He was just like super young and probably very much under the influence of the Magister Militum Arbogast. And we can see that already in those days, you know, 380s, like, it's crazy how already by that time the Magister Militum, a Germanic Magister Militum, had managed to gain such power that he would overshadow the emperor himself, okay? This is crazy. And Valentinian II was a young guy. I think he was like 18 or 19, and it was really tragic. He might have committed suicide. It's not exactly known, or there are also rumors that Arbogast had him killed. Either way, he didn't do much. He was like, you know, like a young, inexperienced guy. And is he unrankable? I wouldn't say so, because he could have done something, but he was just like, he was a weak emperor who didn't do much. So, I mean, it's tragic, but I have to rank him on what he did as an emperor and not how he was as a person. Maybe he was a friendly guy, maybe I would have liked to hang out with him, you know, but I have to rank him on what he did as an emperor, and there isn't much good stuff he did, okay? I just don't see a lot of good that he did, and so his legacy is not a strong one. I would put him in bad or poor. Let's be not so harsh on him, because like, yeah, he was a really young guy who couldn't have done much probably. I mean, what do you want to do as a kid or teenager growing up in such insane times where usurpers pop up all the time? And Magnus Maximus, I think, invaded Italy, even more threatened to invade Italy, and Valentinian II had to flee and stuff like that, if I remember correctly. So very insane times. I cannot blame him. And the West was just already starting to go downhill, because we see that already now the Magister Militum system comes to bite the West in the ass, you know, like this system created already, like I think under Constantine, where the Magister Militum would become this powerful figure, and where the Germanics would like slowly start to become so prominent in the Roman army that they would climb the ranks. And already by that time, a Frankish guy was Magister Militum, rivaling the power of the emperor himself. Think about this, how fast this went. Constantine recruiting the first Franks in the 300, early 310s, 310, 311, after his victories against the Franks. And 60, 70 years later, 2 generations later, we have Frankish Magister Militums. This is insane, how fast this went. Crazy. Okay, Valentinian II. Now we come to Eugenius. Now, so after Valentinian II dies, okay, Arbogast needs a new emperor, and he chooses Eugenius. Eugenius, I think, was an orator at Rome. He was like, he had a senatorial background, if I'm not mistaken, but he was like, he was just a very highly educated type of person, a good speaker, I would say. And he was a traditionalist, okay? He was like a super traditionalist, and he was a pagan sympathizer, possibly a pagan himself. And so this was one of the last times where we would see a pagan revival at Rome. The temples were opened again. The pagans were allowed to hold sacrifices freely. The pagans were allowed to go to all the temples as in the old times. The cult of the Vestal Virgins was allowed to, you know, convene. So everything was as in the old days under Eugenius. So he was religiously tolerant, which I think was a good thing. But of course, then what happened? Civil war against the East, because the East did not recognize Eugenius. Theodosius did not recognize the rule of Eugenius as legitimate. And so the civil war happened. And then, of course, came the infamous Battle of the Frigidus River in 394 AD, where the East famously crushed the West. And this was not on small part an achievement of Flavius Stilicho, who was already like in the East by that time, an accomplished military leader. So Stilicho was fighting for the East in those days under Theodosius, and Theodosius used the Goths as kind of a shield. This was kind of a brutal strategy, which would come to bite the Romans in the ass afterwards, because the Goths were not stupid, and they saw that the Romans used them as kind of a shield, you know, the first line of attack, you know, cannon fodder, so to speak, in the Battle of the Frigidus River, and thousands of, I think, on the first day the battle was really undecided, and I think thousands of Goths died, 5,000 or 10,000, like a huge number. Many Goths died, and the Goths would not forget this. This will be important. The Goths would not forget how they were used as cannon fodder by Theodosius, okay? So, then the wind, according to legend, suddenly turned, and it was seen as a godly sign. This is, of course, probably legend, but indeed, there is probably some grain of truth to that, because the place where this battle took place, I think, is in modern day Slovenia. and that area is known for a certain strong wind that sometimes occurs, blowing from a certain direction, and it can come very suddenly. And this turned the tide of the battle. The first day was really on the side of Eugenius and Arbogast. The second day, then suddenly the wind turned and it went downhill, because suddenly the wind blew into the faces of Eugenius and Arbogast's army, and then they lost. And this was a huge disaster for the Western Roman Empire. I cannot overstate what a brutal disaster this was for the Western Roman Empire. This was an insane disaster. Like, imagine entire legions wiped out just 10 years after the wars against Magnus Maximus. So first Magnus Maximus decimates in this unnecessary war a few legions, high quality comitatenses, okay? High quality comitatenses legions. And then again the same happens here 11 years later under Eugenius and Arbogast. Imagine what this did to the fighting power of the Western Roman Empire. This is crazy. This was really bad for the West, okay? So even though Eugenius per se would have been cool if he would have won, but the fact that he lost, that weakened the West so much, so that even though I like him as a character, like religiously tolerant, okay, allowing the Greco-Roman traditions to flourish again, reopening the old temples in Rome. I love that picture in my mind. This must have been, imagine being a pagan in those days. It must have felt like a wonderful revival. Imagine being a pagan in those days in Rome, AD 392, 393. Wow. Okay? This must have been wonderful, but unfortunately, his legacy, what he did, that was not good for the West, Eugenius. Okay? That was not good. I'm sorry, this was not good. Like, I have to put you in bed. Even though I like you as a person, Eugenius, but you left the West weakened. And this hurts me, Eugenius, okay? If you would have won, you would have been very high up, certainly, but now I cannot give you a good ranking. Now comes an interesting character. Theodosius the Great. The Great. Because every emperor, of course, was automatically the Great who was a Christian fanatic. Because if you were an emperor that was good for the Christian church, they would be, of course, remembered as the Great, because the Christian church is what survived the fall, was the institution that survived the fall of the Western Roman Empire. So if an emperor was good for the church, then of course he was great. But was Theodosius really great? We remember that it was him who crushed the Western legions, you know? Like, imagine, okay, I can understand him, right? He's like, against Magnus Maximus, it's clear. It's a usurper from Britain. He invades, like, what you want to do, okay? Against Magnus Maximus, but he was very much focused on his own dynasty and on his own legacy. I think he was a selfish guy, and I just don't like his religious intolerance, okay? As soon as he won, he cracked down on the old Greco-Roman faith. In Rome, he had the Vestal Virgins disbanded. This 1,000-year, imagine, a 1,000-year-old institution that goes back to the very beginnings of Rome, disbanded. What does that do to the morale of the Romans? Like, imagine you're a Western Roman living in Rome. What does that do to you? You know? This is like, I don't know, a modern analogy. I don't know, I cannot even think of one. This is like, this is just insane, disbanding such an old institution, which is like so interlinked with the very foundation of Rome. So the religious intolerance, I didn't like it. He also probably had the temples shut down again. It's not 100% clear, but we can reconstruct that from that time onwards, paganism was on a very downhill trajectory, and there are some surviving sources saying that he did close the temples in Rome. And we remember he was the guy who had the Goths used as cannon fodder in the Battle of the Frigidus River. He used them as cannon fodder. What was he thinking? I mean, he was probably thinking like, let's use those Goths as cannon fodder, and then we don't have to waste precious Roman lives, which might first have sounded like a good idea, but didn't he anticipate that maybe the Goths, wouldn't be so happy with this? That maybe they would say, hey, the Romans treated us pretty poorly. Okay, they treated us pretty poorly. We will remember this. And this is exactly what happened, okay? And from that time onward, the Goths went really berserk under Alaric. And Alaric would not forget this. He would not forget this. And they could not get rid of the Goths. So Theodosius was never able to expel the Goths. He was never able to expel the Goths. Never. And then, after winning at Frigidus, what does he do? He freaking dies. After winning at Frigidus, after destroying Western legions, after weakening the West, after shutting down the temples and being religiously super intolerant, after thousands of Goths freaking died at Frigidus because of him, which would later lead to huge repercussions, he freaking dies. And that's not enough, because what does he do afterwards? He leaves his two sons, his two incompetent sons, Honorius and Arcadius, on the throne. Wow. Theodosius, wow. Wow, how great you were. How great, you deserve the title of great. Very, very much. So what was his legacy then? Okay? Please tell me, what was his great legacy? What was his contribution for the Roman Empire? Weakening the West? Cracking down on religion, like being religiously intolerant? I don't see it. Killing thousands of Goths, which would bite the Romans in the ass. Dying prematurely, leaving his two incompetent sons on the throne. I'm sorry, he was not great for me. I cannot put him in great. He's poor. For me, he's poor. Okay? Poor! Okay? I'm sorry. Many people will not agree with this. Many people will say, you're insane. He won some victories against the Goths. Yeah, this might be true, but let's look at the legacy. Let's look at the legacy of those people, okay? Let's not try to intermingle it with personal opinions and with like biases. Because like, look, I like Eugenius, right? I like him as a person, as a character, but I put him in bad. Okay? Please don't forget this. So I try to be neutral here, despite I might have some pagan sympathies or like Greco-Roman sympathies of the old cults, but still I try to not let this interfere. I just look at the legacy of what they did and how this affected the Roman Empire, and I see more bad things with Theodosius than good things. Sorry, that's just my opinion. Many people will not agree. I'm 100% sure I will get a lot of outraged comments like, what? You're so... You don't know what you're talking about. It's okay. I know we're on YouTube. I know this will happen. But hey, that's just my opinion, how I see things. Oh, Arcadius. Now comes Arcadius. Arcadius, man. Arcadius. I don't know what this guy did. I don't know what this guy actually did. Like, he was just sitting in his palace the whole day. Like, he was sitting in his palace, praying, being like, trying to be pious. He was like, almost like a monk. He was just like sitting in the palace, going to the church, doing some religious policies in a time where they would have needed, like, the East would have needed a strong emperor. And because he was such a weak emperor, other people controlled him. For example, like the Eastern Praetorian prefect Rufinus. Okay, Rufinus. And the problem with Rufinus was that he was a rival of Stilicho. And this rivalry between Rufinus in the East and Stilicho in the West was also super bad for the Roman Empire, because many forget, for example, that Stilicho defeated Alaric multiple times. And he had the chance, Stilicho had the chance to crush Alaric once and for all. I don't remember the year, I'm sorry, it was, I think, in the late 390s. I think at some point in the 390s, Stilicho had the chance to defeat Alaric once and for all, but Rufinus intervened, okay? And so Alaric was allowed to live. And this is the direct fault of Arcadius being such a weak emperor. And he just takes credit later for crushing the rebellion of Tribigild and Gainas, but even then he didn't do much. It wasn't his achievement. He built the Column of Arcadius, where he commemorated his grandiose victory against the rebelling Goths, but it was not his achievement. He didn't do much. He was sitting in the palace. He was praying all day long. He was weak. He was controlled by his Praetorian prefect Rufinus, by other powerful figures. Later allowed the Goths to rebel. Super bad situation. Because of him also Alaric was allowed to survive. So this is a really, I don't see anything good in Arcadius. Maybe he was like, at least, I mean, he didn't at least actively try to do things that were bad. So maybe his only good quality was that he was doing nothing. Okay, that is already better than others, which we will see later, who actively did bad things. So he was just like, he was in his palace, not doing much. So maybe this was like, he didn't do actively things that were super bad for the Roman Empire. At least something, okay? So that is maybe his redeeming quality, why I will put him in bad. Okay? Not in terrible, but in bad, because he did not actively, I don't know, kill Stilicho or some crazy stuff. You know? Which we will come to emperors who did actively very bad things. Constans II, I think, was a usurper who was very short-lived. I would put him in unrankable because he was a very short-lived guy. Constantine III, I think, was the usurper from Britannia. Understandable that he, like, after... Now the West, we recapitulate, the West was weakened now, okay? The times of Valentinian I are long over. Many legions have been crushed by the East. And now, because the West was so weakened and saw itself confronted with massive incursions by Alaric, thanks Theodosius for that one, massive incursions by Alaric and by Radagaisus, huge Germanic armies. I think Italy was invaded 4 times in the early 400s. 4 times. Who defended Italy? Flavius Stilicho, the great heroic defender of the West. Flavius Stilicho defended Italy. He scrambled troops from everywhere. He had to withdraw troops from the Rhine frontier. He had to recruit slaves and gladiators. Like, the situation was so desperate, they were recruiting slaves and gladiators even. That was insane. So Stilicho, huge genius for defending Italy 4 times against Alaric and Radagaisus. Multiple times of being cursed, multiple times. Alaric twice, Radagaisus twice. And then, of course, because Italy was under attack, the Rhine frontier was weakened. You need to withdraw troops because the West was weakened by decades of civil war against the East. And so now the Germanics managed to breach the Rhine frontier on December 31st, 406, AD 406. So huge disaster. And then Gaul gets invaded. They go as far down as Hispania. Huge chaos in Gaul. And Constantine III hears these news in Britannia, and of course he thinks like, what the hell is happening? Okay, where is the emperor? What is he doing? Well, nothing apparently, okay? So he invades and tries to restore order in Britannia, but of course, unfortunately, this would lead to civil war. and basically he didn't manage to defeat Honorius. If he would have managed to defeat Honorius, install himself as new Western Roman Emperor, I might have a better picture of him. But he left again. It was again one of those many usurpers from Britannia who left the Western Roman Empire weakened because he lost. He just lost. And he also withdrew basically all the military resources from Britannia. And this is actually, I think, 407 when all the legions from Britannia are withdrawn and Britannia is left to itself. So this is when Britannia ceases to have a Roman military presence, an organized one, and where Britannia is basically given up. It's given up, de facto given up. The Romans still think it's not given up, funny enough, but de facto it has been given up. So I don't see what Constantine III did good for the empire. I'm sorry, I wish I could see what he did, like a positive contribution, but it's like Britannia was lost and he didn't achieve his end goal. He didn't achieve his end goal of installing himself as Western Roman Emperor. So I also am sorry, I cannot be too generous here. I don't see many good things that he did. Sorry. So, okay, Constantius III. My God, finally. I thought we never get to good emperors again. Constantius III, he was emperor only for a short while, but I have to judge him based on his whole achievements of his career. And he was, before he became emperor, he was made Magister Militum, which is the only good deed by Honorius. He made him Magister Militum, and he didn't kill him, thank God, and he just let him do things. And Constantius III was militarily extremely capable, and he was the guy who stabilized the Western Roman Empire after those huge disasters of the invasions of 406, 407, okay? And the huge chaos in Gaul and Hispania. He managed to stabilize the empire so that the 410s were actually like 415 looked better again than 407, 408. And he was also able to defeat many usurpers, which of course unfortunately weakened the empire, but it restored some sort of centralized power projected from Ravenna. So the Western Imperial Court was strong again at Ravenna. So I think he managed to stabilize the Western Roman Empire, and this was an incredible achievement in a time where the West was basically seeing itself attacked from all sides. I personally think Constantius III therefore is great, especially because it was a time where it looked really bad and he managed to stabilize the empire. And this would have still, in that times, they still might have been able to win. They still might have been able to stabilize the West. As we can see, Constantius III proves for me that the West could still have been saved. If you wouldn't have had a series of really bad emperors afterwards, and if Honorius and Valentinian III wouldn't have reigned for such a long time and done such terrible things, the Western Roman Empire might have still stabilized and still might have been able to survive. And Constantius III is proof for that, in my opinion. So Constantius III was really great, and the only bad thing I can say about him that he died too early. That's the only thing I can say about him. That is not good. He died too early, but his lasting legacy, if I look, even though he died early and didn't reign for long, his lasting legacy was basically to buy the Western Roman Empire a few decades more time, which is a grandiose achievement. And if all the people after him would have been as capable as him, the West would have survived. The West would have survived. But this was not to be, friends. This was not to be, because now we are getting to Honorius himself. Honorius himself. Okay? And Honorius, I'm sorry, but Honorius is like, man, the only good thing, let's start with the good thing. The only good thing he did was allowing Constantius III to do his thing. Like, he was intelligent enough to, after elevating Constantius III to the position of Magister Militum, after having killed the defender of Rome, Flavius Stilicho, he at least allowed Constantius III to do his thing and didn't interfere. That was the only good achievement. However, his legacy, like what is his legacy? If we look at like what did Honorius leave us with? He reigned for such a long time. Honorius reigned for such a long time that he was the guy basically where the fall of the West would begin. Now, we cannot blame him 100% because, as we saw, the foundation for that was already laid in the 380s, early 390s, where in the 390s he was still a kid. So the civil wars against the East and all those things. But my God, killing Flavius Stilicho, that was a really bad decision. And not only did he kill Stilicho, but he initiated a pogrom against Germanic families, like the supporters of Stilicho. Stilicho had a lot of Germanic foederati, and he basically had many of those innocent people killed, members of Stilicho's supporters and Stilicho's foederati. And what did they do? They, of course, fled to Alaric and joined Alaric. So by doing this, he made Alaric even stronger. And he was just not able to win against Alaric. He was just not able to save Rome from being sacked, which was a massive psychological shock. Okay, it was not strategically. The sack of Rome, which happened under Honorius, was not the end of the Roman Empire as it is often portrayed. It was a bad thing, sure, but strategically it was not so super bad for the Western Roman Empire. It was not so insanely bad that it couldn't recover. It was a massive psychological shock, okay? It's like a massive psychological shock, but it was not strategically super insanely bad. So the West would have certainly recovered. But killing Stilicho, the pogrom against the families of Stilicho's foederati, not being able, he only killed a lot of usurpers. He was never able to really oust the Germanic invaders and decisively defeat them. He decisively defeated a lot of usurpers, which basically left the West weakened. But he never decisively defeated the Visigoths or the Burgundians, or all those other Germanic nations that had invaded. He never did that. So I'm sorry, but I would say terrible. Terrible. I'm sorry. Even his redeeming quality, this one redeeming quality that he left Constantius III do his thing. You might also argue that he was only bad and not terrible. So I'm accepting of both these, okay, bad or terrible. But the thing is, his legacy. I'm looking at his legacy. Tell me, what was his positive legacy? What was the positive he left for the Roman Empire? What were the positives? I don't see positives. I'm sorry, I don't see them. Okay, yeah, Constantius III, he allowed him to do his thing. I think he also had the Aurelian walls of Rome increased in height, which was the last secular building project in Rome of those times. For the last secular building project in Rome. This might also have been not completely bad, but his legacy was terrible. The West dissolved, this was when the West started dissolving. I'm sorry, that's his legacy. So, where were we? Now Johannes. That's interesting. Johannes would have been a good emperor, okay? Would have been a good emperor. Unfortunately, he was not accepted by the East. So, as soon as Honorius died, Johannes came to power. He was religiously tolerant, which is a great thing in those times, especially. He allowed. This was again some sort of pagan revival. Many tend to forget this. We had pagan revivals many times over and over again. It was never a done deal that the old Greco-Roman faith would die. So there was a pagan resurgence. There was probably you could go to the temples again. The old cults were never fully restored because he didn't reign long enough. I think he reigned for 2 years. And then, of course, the East sent an army against him, under leadership of Aspar, the Eastern Magister Militum, and his son Ardaburius, And there was fighting, and the last thing that Johannes did, his last act was to send Aetius, to make Aetius Magister Militum. First of all, it was Johannes. Many forget this. The rise of Aetius was under Johannes, and send him to get help from Aetius's Hunnic Foederati, and come back with his Hunnic Foederati to fight against the East. But Aetius came too late. When Aetius returned, what happened? Theodosius II had sent Aspar and Ardaburius with an army. Johannes lost. He was publicly humiliated, the poor guy, and then executed. Really an undeserving end for the poor guy. And who was he replaced with? We will get to that. But I wish Johannes would have reigned longer. Then the West would have gotten probably a capable guy. But yeah, he didn't reign long enough. However, it's his legacy that Aetius would later rise to power, which is also kind of a mixed bag, because Aetius was not like a purely noble character. However, Aetius did win many victories for the West. So I have to say that even despite Johannes' short reign, his legacy was Aetius. So, I cannot be super bad with him, strict with him, but he didn't achieve great things though. A short pagan revival is not long enough. So I still have to say poor. I'm really sorry, I still have to say poor. I know it's brutal, but Now Theodosius II is interesting. Theodosius II is an interesting guy, oftentimes underrated. He was actually a pretty good emperor, I would say. A pretty good emperor. He was like a patron of the arts. He was like quite a forward-thinking guy. I think it was under him that the University of Constantinople was founded. I don't want to say anything wrong, but I think it was under him. He also tried to mount expeditions to help the West. Okay, I think it was under his rule that a joint expedition was undertaken to reclaim Africa, which had been lost to the Vandals. So I think 2 times actually, in the 430s once under leadership of Aspar, and then another time in 441. Both attempts failed, unfortunately, but still he did try to help the West. But of course, unfortunately, he was the guy who sent an army against Johannes and who sent Valentinian III to replace Johannes. So I have to hold this against him, because his legacy is installing Valentinian III on the Western throne and ending the life of a very good emperor. So that is his legacy. So I cannot put him too high, but he did try to help the West. Okay, it's not like he was just completely neglecting the West. But of course, he was religiously intolerant. So he was not really completely bad. I would say I would put him in okay. Okay, I would put him in okay, because as I said, he's kind of he did try to help the West. He did some good things, but of course, unfortunately, also some bad things. And his lasting impact, his lasting legacy on Roman history will be that he is the guy who installed Valentinian III on the Western throne. Probably he didn't have like many, I would say, alternatives. He wanted to get rid of them, like Valentinian III and Galla Placidia were fled to the east, when Honorius died, or shortly before he died. And because they had a fallout with Honorius, they didn't get along, fled to the east. And he wanted to just get rid of the guys. I understand him, but still, that wasn't so good what happened to the West afterward, because Pulcheria, I think, was the wife of Theodosius II? I'm not sure, but I would put her in, like, I don't know, I cannot really rank her. I don't know too much about her. I don't know her lasting legacy, so for me, I would put her in unrankable. I cannot tell you too much about what Pulcheria did. I'm not sure that she had a great lasting influence, so I would put it in unrankable. So now we get to Valentinian III. My God, this is a very fast one. This is a very fast one. Terrible. I'm sorry. Valentinian III is like Honorius, but probably even a bit worse than Honorius. Because contrary to Honorius, who killed Stilicho and then afterwards at least chose a capable successor, Valentinian III didn't do that. He just killed Aetius, and that's it. No, I don't have a plan B. I don't know. I kill the guy and see what happens. Kill the last defender of Rome in those days, the guy who defeated Attila the Hun. Just kill him and see what happens. And what happened? Of course, what happened? The West fell steeply downhill. Marcellinus of Dalmatia immediately goes crazy because Aetius was his friend. He rebels. The province of Dalmatia splits off from the Western Roman Empire. Immediately, the Germanics use the chaos. They use the chaos of the murder of Aetius. They immediately expand their territories. Valentinian III was not able to stop or to reconquer Roman Africa. I cannot hold it against him that Africa fell, because in those times he was still a kid. 429, 430, he was still young. And we can more likely blame Galla Placidia, his mother, who was basically a regent in those days. And we can also blame the civil war between Flavius Aetius, Bonifacius, and Flavius Felix. It was a civil war, a power struggle going on. And, we can blame those circumstances, but again, Valentinian III reigned for 30 years, man, for 30 years. And what did he do? What was his legacy? If we look at the map of the Western Roman Empire when Valentinian III started his reign, 425 if I'm not mistaken, and then we look another time at 455 when his reign was over, a huge downhill trajectory. This was things went steeply downhill. The map looked so much worse. The map of the Roman Empire, my God, Africa was lost. The territories of the Germanics increased in size enormously. The state finances were ruined after the loss of Africa. He never was able to reconquer Africa. He killed Aetius, the very capable Magister Militum. So I'm really sorry, I don't see. The only good thing he did was I think in 448, he reintroduced the right to bear arms. Novella Valentiniani 9, I think. The law he passed to allow Roman citizens to wear arms and to build private, group together in militia, defenders, to be allowed to fight against the Germanics. Because the crazy thing is, imagine, only as late as 448 were the Romans actually allowed to fight against the Germanics, make their own arms, gather together in groups and fight against the Germanics. 448! They should have done this this should have been the first thing. Honorius should have done this in 407. Honorius should have done this in 401, 402 already, when the real invasion started. And it's 448. Thank you very much. This comes half a century too late. This comes half a century too late. So this is maybe the only good thing that he did. Apart from that, I can't see anything good. So really bad. Petronius Maximus, oh God. This guy, very fast, he was a complete a-hole. Petronius Maximus, he was possibly the guy who had Valentinian III murdered. And what does he do? He doesn't do anything. The Vandals seize the chaos, the opportunity, the complete chaos after, in short succession, Aetius had been murdered and then Valentinian III. The West was in chaos. The Germanics used the situations always. The Germanics were not stupid. They always saw, the West is in chaos. against civil wars, they fight against each other, they are in upheaval. Let's use the situation. You know, they were intelligent. Let's use the situation to our advantage. So what did they do? They immediately sacked Rome in 455. They sailed with a huge fleet to Rome. And what does Petronius Maximus do? What does Petronius Maximus do? He tries to flee Rome. He doesn't organize a defense. He doesn't he doesn't try to gather troops riding around Italy, trying to gather the remaining strength, mount a defense of Rome. No. He tries to, I think he disguises himself even and tries to flee from Rome. But he's discovered while trying to flee from Rome by a mob of angry people, and they kill him. That's all he did. He didn't do anything. The legacy he left was a destabilized empire and the sack of Rome, and then trying to flee like a coward. Really bad. Now, friends, we get to Marcian. This actually, I think was a good emperor. Okay, Marcian. I can't say too many bad things about Marcian. Many forget that it was Marcian who basically defeated Attila the Hun. Like, you will say, what? Huh? But Aetius defeated him. No, Marcian was the guy who attacked Attila the Hun, I think in 452, when Attila invaded Italy. There's this story that the Pope then miraculously saved the Romans. Yeah, nice legend. In reality, Aetius tried with all the very few remaining troops that he had to hinder Attila's advance as best as he could, but he didn't have much to work with anymore by that time. But who saved the West in those times was Marcian, the Eastern Roman Emperor. And Marcian launched a massive attack into the Hunnic Empire, into the Hunnic hinterland from the east, biting the Huns in the ass, basically. Biting them in the ass, okay? And then the Huns like, what? We are attacked from, in our homeland. And then they had to withdraw. That is the reason why Attila withdrew. Not because the Pope miraculously saved the Western Roman Empire, as it's sometimes liked, is sometimes propagated for, of course, probably purposes to glorify the Pope and glorify the meaning of the Church and so on. But it was Marcian. So Marcian was a solid emperor, okay? He was a solid emperor who helped the West, and he was very old, of course. I think he was already in his 60s when he even became emperor. So I don't expect too much of a guy who's in his 60s to, reign for a very long time. But we will see that Marcian did another great thing. I'm not sure. I don't want to say anything wrong. But no, wait. I think when Marcian died, Leo I became emperor, but I don't think that Marcian chose him. I think he was chosen by Aspar. I think Aspar, the Eastern Roman Magister Militum, chose Leo I as new emperor. So that Leo I is not Marcian's accomplishment, but still I would say Marcian was a solid Eastern Roman emperor who tried to help the West, which I think was a great achievement. Now we come to Avitus. Now Avitus is an interesting character because the poor guy didn't have a chance. He was proclaimed emperor by the Visigoths, and he came to Rome with the Visigothic army. The Senate instantly hated him. You're the guy who got proclaimed, made emperor by barbarians. You're like a barbarian usurper. He came to Rome, he didn't have a chance. He wasn't accepted by the Senate. Nobody liked him, basically. He was like the Visigothic outsider from Gaul. He was not a Visigoth himself, of course. He was a Gallo-Roman, but he was enabled by the Visigoths, and many people didn't like this. But he won some victories against the Vandals. He managed to stop the Vandal raids on the coasts of Italy. And that actually is interesting because that was the only time Ricimer did something great or something good. Ricimer won victories against the Vandals at the Battle of Corsica, I think, 457, I think, Battle of Corsica and Battle of Sardinia, 2 battles against the Vandals, and that is the only time Ricimer did something good actually in his very early career. Ricimer won battles against the Vandals, and Avitus, not knowing what a character Ricimer would turn out to be, elevated him to Magister Militum. A bad mistake, as we will find out, but Avitus didn't know. So Avitus wanted to do everything in his power to strengthen the West, and he went a bit too far. He started melting, I think, down statues and everything what was made of precious metals in Rome. He started melting down gilded roof tiles. He started scrapping everything which was still left in Rome after the 2 sacks, and wanted to mint coins from those metals, melting down bronze statues and creating bronze coins. Why? Of course, to recruit new troops and to fight against the Germanics, to strengthen the Western Roman Empire's capability to recruit new armies and to fight and maybe to survive. So he was not as bad as many make him out to be, but of course he was then overthrown, because he was always the outsider from Gaul who never had a chance. Never had a chance, the poor guy. So I cannot hold this against him. He tried everything in his power to strengthen the West. He won victories against the Vandals with Ricimer. He tried maybe too much to, strengthen the finances. So I would put him in okay, to be honest. Sounds crazy. Okay, it sounds crazy, but I would put him in okay. I would put him in okay. He tried imagine the guy didn't have a chance. But his legacy was not as bad because he won victories against the Vandals, okay? He did manage to stabilize stabilize Italy in that the Vandal raids were over. The Vandal raids were now passé for a while. So that was not a bad achievement. However, now of course, being the outsider, he never had a chance, and now we get of course to our boy. We get to our boy Majorian. And Majorian, of course, man, I named the channel after Majorian, okay? It's clear that I'm a fanboy. I'm a Majorian fanboy. But I will try to be neutral here. I will, as with the others, Majorian will not get a special treatment. Okay? Majorian will not get a special treatment. Majorian, for me, is of course a hero. And Edward Gibbon famously said, I think, Majorian represents the welcome discovery of a great, and I don't know how he formulated it, the discovery of a great hero such as sometimes arise in a degenerate age to vindicate the honor of the human species. Something along those lines. Great praise. Procopius said that Majorian was the most virtuous of all Roman emperors. Think about this. Procopius saying this about a Western Roman emperor, that Majorian surpassed in virtue all of the previous Roman emperors. Incredible statement from Procopius. So Majorian was one of the last times when the Roman Empire had a chance to survive. He won victories against the Visigoths, against the Burgundians, against the Suevi, making them effectively reducing them to the status of foederati. He recruited an army 30,000 strong, reconquered Germanic territory, and then when his final grand design came to fruition, almost came to fruition, he tried to reconquer the Vandal kingdom. He built a fleet of 300 ships, which was massive for the time. The West was almost bankrupt, remember? We're talking the West was almost bankrupt. And he amasses a fleet of 300 ships. Because, remember, the West didn't have a fleet anymore since Constantine the Great took the 2 Praetorian fleets from the West for his fight against Licinius over 130 years earlier. And in those 130 years, the West didn't have a fleet anymore. because the East basically stole the fleet of the West, if you will. So now Majorian builds a fleet for the West, the first in over 100 years, and he tries to reconquer the Vandal kingdom, but unfortunately he was not able to do this. Like, mistakes were made, okay? I don't know what Majorian did. Like, there are different accounts that there were like traitors, and they gave the location of the fleet price to the Vandals, and the Vandals learned therefore where the Western Roman fleet was situated. It was stationed around the modern day Elche in Spain. I think back then it was called Portus Iliquitanus, near Carthago Nova, and the Vandals learned about this, and then they did a surprise attack. Okay? And then, of course, that was really bad. And then on the way back to Italy, he made a second big mistake. He disbanded his Foederati army. That was not good, Majorian. That was not good. He didn't foresee the treachery of Ricimer, and that for me is like, that is not good. Okay, that is like, he should have had a feeling that Ricimer would betray him. Like, come on, man. How can you be so naive and not see the treachery of Ricimer coming? He should have foreseen the treachery of Ricimer. Like, Majorian, let's make it like this here. Majorian would be excellent if he would have achieved to reconquer Vandal Africa, and if he would have gotten rid of Ricimer. Okay? If he would have managed to kill Ricimer, to get definite control over the West, and to reconquer the Vandal kingdom, he would have been like Aurelian. He would have like been restitutor orbis, restorer of the world. He would have been on par with Aurelian. Unfortunately, he didn't manage to do that. He didn't manage, and I have to judge him. I have to judge him based on that, okay? I cannot see it through my fanboy glasses and say like, oh, he was a cool guy. I probably would have been like him. He should have been more methodical. He should have waited for Eastern reinforcements. He should have collaborated with the East more in basically trying to amass a united fleet, as what happened later under Anthemius 7 years later. This happened. The East sent a huge fleet in 468, so it would have been possible to collaborate more with the East, be a bit more methodical. But of course, his achievements were still impressive. He managed to restore a lot of the Western Roman Empire. Like, the territorial gain was incredible. I think the Western Empire's size increased by 50% on the Majorian. Think about this. In a time span of only a few years. That was massive. And he tried to reform his novellae Maioriani. His reforms were incredible. He saw all the points that weakened the Western Roman Empire. All the points, he made them out one by one and addressed every single problem with a law. The decay of the old monuments, a law. Corruption, a law. Declining birth rates, a law. To counter all these things. Genius, okay? But unfortunately, he was so close. It's so frustrating. So, excellent if he would have achieved the conquest of Africa, and if he would have killed Ricimer. Great if he would have achieved only one of those two things. Getting rid of Ricimer or conquering Africa. But neither of those two things, I can only put him in good. I can only put him in good because he will be remembered as basically the last, or one of the last emperors to basically try to save the Western Roman Empire. And that is actually an impressive achievement, but unfortunately he didn't quite make it, so I cannot put him in excellent or great. I can't, even though I love the guy, obviously. Now, Libius Severus is kind of interesting because many see him as a puppet. I'm not sure if he was. They're conflicting. We don't know much about Libius Severus, okay? We don't know much about Libius Severus. So, there's a lot of conflicting information. He reigned from Rome. Many say he was a puppet of Ricimer, but he mysteriously then suddenly died. And some say, I think he ruled for 4 or 5 years. And many say that it was Ricimer who poisoned him. So maybe he was not as much as a puppet. You know, this puppet master thing with Ricimer. Ricimer tried to be a puppet master, but I think he was an idiot who always failed being a puppet master. You know, he tried to be a puppet master, but with whom was he a puppet master? With Majorian he wasn't. With Anthemius he wasn't. Maybe not even with Libius Severus. So, you know, so he might have been killed by Ricimer, we don't know. We don't really know. But unfortunately, like, his lasting legacy, he wasn't able to defend the Western Roman Empire. Basically, at this point, all the gains of Majorian were quickly reverted under his rule. So under his rule, every territorial gain that Majorian made was reverted. Okay? So I cannot rank him very high up, but he didn't do things that were actively bad because the situation was just insanely bad, and he also wasn't recognized by the East, which was super important to be recognized by the East. The Eastern Roman Emperor Leo did not recognize him, and that's unfortunate because he then didn't have like cooperation with the East, and that might have been also a reason why Ricimer then got rid of him. Like, some sources say that he was poisoned in the palace of the Caesars on the Palatine Hill in Rome, because I said that he reigned from Rome. Many emperors actually in those days reigned from Rome, unbeknownst to many. The capital of the Western Roman Empire in those days was more often than not Rome again, after Valentinian III had moved there, but that's another story. But according to some theories, he was poisoned by Ricimer in the palace of the Caesars. And so the lasting legacy, I don't see many. I mean, he wasn't able to stabilize the West. He managed to reign for an impressively long time in those times, at 4 or 5 years or something. So I would put him in bad. I'm sorry, I cannot see the good things that he did, you know? I cannot see the good things that he did. Now we come to Anthemius, and Anthemius, I think, is one of the most underrated emperors ever. Majorian is already underrated, but now finally people start to see what Majorian did. 10, 15 years ago, Majorian was the underrated guy. But now thanks to us here on YouTube talking about the achievements of Majorian, he's immortalized now in many memes. There are many videos made about him. Now we realize that Majorian was actually an impressive guy. But 10, 15 years ago, this wasn't the case. 10, 15 years ago, Majorian was the underrated guy. But nowadays, Anthemius still is underrated. And Anthemius, in my opinion, that was the last chance to really save the Western Roman Empire. Anthemius was the last chance, not Majorian. Majorian was the last, I would say, still very good chance, but the last chance per se was undertaken under Anthemius. He was sent by the East, by the Emperor Leo, and the first thing he did when imagine that, he arrived at Rome, being like the Greek intruder, that's how he was seen by the Roman Senate. He mounts an expedition and tries to reconquer Africa. Many forget this. 467, yes. He tried to mount an expedition, first thing he did, with Marcellinus of Dalmatia, trying to reconquer Africa. So he comes to Rome, and the first thing he does, he immediately tries to restore the Western Roman Empire. Bam, immediately. Think about this, that's crazy. Then he tries to befriend Ricimer. A bad mistake, because we know in hindsight that you couldn't befriend Ricimer. Ricimer was a psycho. You cannot befriend this guy. But he said, like, okay, let's try at least to befriend Ricimer. So he marries his daughter Olybrius to Ricimer, tries basically to establish a stable power structure in the West, and then tries to reconquer Africa. And in 467, Marcellinus of Dalmatia and the contribution of the Western Roman Empire, possibly some troops, possibly some ships, and this expedition starts. And why does it not manage to reconquer Africa? Because huge bad weather events took place in the summer and autumn of 467, so the fleet was forced to return. 1 year later, the next try to reconquer Africa, this time of course, with help from the East. The East sends a huge fleet of 1,100 ships. There's the huge Battle of Cape Bon in 468, which unfortunately failed due to reasons which had nothing to do with Anthemius. Anthemius couldn't have influenced the outcome, but he tried, he tried everything in his power to restore the Western Roman Empire. Everything in his power. And many forget this, the Greek intruder. No, he did everything he could to restore the Western Roman Empire. And it was not his fault that Cape Bon failed. It was the fault of the idiot Basiliscus, as I have said many times. The idiot guy who listened to Aspar. Aspar oh yeah, give Gaiseric time to prepare terms for surrender. Freaking idiot, And then Gaiseric uses, of course, the situation, amasses a fleet of fire ships, sends it against the fleet stationed at Cape Bon. Huge disaster. Okay? Huge freaking disaster. And half of the Roman fleet is destroyed. Huge disaster for the East. The East retreats. Marcellinus of Dalmatia is killed in Sicily, possibly by Ricimer. Oh god, Ricimer again. And Heraclius, coming from the south, from Tripolitania, then has to withdraw, even though he managed to conquer Tripolitania. This is often forgotten. Tripolitania, for a short while, was again part of the Western Roman Empire. Only for a short while. But he has to retreat again. Because Marcellinus dead, the main fleet half destroyed, bam. But this was not Anthemius' fault. Anthemius tried everything in his power. But even then he didn't give up. What does he do in 469? He tries to fight against the Visigoths. He fights on all fronts, okay? With the little he has left. 469, he calls upon help of Riotamus, king of the Britons. Jordanes writes, Anthemius calls upon help of Riotamus to fight against the Visigoths. Unfortunately, again there's treachery, and Arvandus, this a-hole, gives prize the location of Riotamus' army to the Visigoths under the king Euric, and Riotamus is defeated, and the fight against the Visigoths is lost. But even then, Anthemius doesn't give up. Even then he doesn't give up. He sends his son Anthemiolus, together with two other Roman generals, to Arelate to fight against the Visigoths. Unfortunately, and this is a mistake, I would say, on part of Anthemius, he should have led the expedition himself. Anthemius was a capable general. Many forget that he fought in the Eastern Roman Empire before he was sent to the West by Leo I. He fought, against the Huns. He won victories for the Eastern Roman Empire. He was a capable general. So he should have led that expedition himself. But the thing is, we don't even know how old Anthemius was by that point. Maybe he was 60. If you're 60, or 65, you probably don't lead an expedition anymore yourself against the Visigoths. So because we don't even know how old Anthemius was, we cannot maybe blame him for sending his son Anthemiolus. Unfortunately, Anthemiolus and the others might not have been the best generals, and so they lost against the Visigoths. And so you see, Anthemius tried everything in his power to win. Everything, he never gave up. And he was religiously tolerant, very rare in those times. He was friends with Marcellinus of Dalmatia. He was a friend of Messius Phoebus Severus. They were probably all attending the Neoplatonic Academy of Proclus in Alexandria. So he was a philosopher, a thinker, very religiously tolerant, a patron of the old ways, if you will. So he was even contemplating to restore the Greco-Roman cults at Rome and reopen the Temple of Jupiter, according to Damascus. Think about that. That's crazy. That's insane. Reopening the Temple of Jupiter in 470. Think about it. It's crazy. So he was, I think, Anthemius for me is the most overlooked guy and always the Greek intruder. I'm putting him on the same place as Majorian. You will say what? Are you insane? Are you crazy? Yeah, but look, I'm judging the lasting accomplishments as well. Majorian didn't establish a Majorianic dynasty. He didn't manage to reconquer Africa and kill Ricimer. So all his gains were quickly negated. And Anthemius also tried everything in his power. He did everything for the West. He gave his life for the West, like Majorian. Because, like Majorian, he would be killed by Ricimer. Because he was so independent, and Ricimer always wanted to be the puppet master, this idiot. And of course, this led to civil war with Ricimer. And then Ricimer marches on Anthemius, who reigns from Rome, by the way, old school from Rome, having his residence in the old palace of the Caesars on the Palatine Hill. Ricimer marches upon Rome, sacks Rome, thousands of Romans die, amazing Ricimer, friendly guy, right? Killing so many people, so many innocent people, just for his own personal greed and power, lust for power. And Anthemius is killed either by Ricimer or Gundobad. So that's the end of Anthemius. It's sad, just sad. Olybrius basically was just a freaking puppet, man. I hate the guy. He really was a puppet of Ricimer, okay? He was a puppet of Ricimer. He didn't do anything. He immediately died after being emperor for a very short while. He was a complete idiot. We don't even need to talk about him too long. He didn't reign for long. He just immediately died like an idiot. He was a puppet of Ricimer, fighting against Anthemius, siding with Ricimer. It's super bad. It's super bad. Leo the First, friends. Leo the First. Mwah. Okay? Mwah. Leo the First. Let's make this like Leo the First. I'm putting him excellent because I'm comparing him not to like the likes of Trajan now or to Aurelian. Okay, I'm comparing him to his to this 100-year time span from Valentinian I to the fall of the West. Okay, I'm comparing him to his peers in that time period. Not if I would compare him to Aurelian, of course, or Trajan, I wouldn't put him in excellent because Aurelian and Trajan would be in excellent, right? But I'm comparing him to his peers. And Leo the First, man, he was the reason. Okay, he was the reason that the Eastern Roman Empire grew so much in power in the times when the West fell. He was the reason. He consolidated the power in the East. He was a really good administrator, but not only that. Not only that. He didn't only improve the state finances. Okay, after the Battle of Cape Bon, the finances were really looking bad. Okay, they were looking really bad, but that was not his fault, not directly at least. The only mistake I think that he made was being a poor judge of character and sending Basiliscus as the commander of the fleet at Cape Bon. That was the only mistake I see. But apart from that, he tried everything in his power to save the West. Everything. He was the emperor who realized, guys, if the West falls, the East will also fall. And that's how it was. Remember, many people think that, the West was just weak and no problem. When the West falls, the East doesn't need the West. As soon as the West was gone, the East would follow. It was just a matter of time. It was just a matter of time. The West needs the East to survive, and the East needs the West to survive. It was a symbiotic relationship. It was like a symbiotic thing. If one part dies, the other one will die as well. Just a matter of time. When it would die. That's my theory. But I might be wrong on this, of course, but that's the feeling I have. So, Leo I tries time and time again to save the West, cooperates, accepts Majorian as emperor, sends Anthemius to the West, sends huge fleets to help the West, consolidates power in the East. I cannot say anything bad about the guy. I cannot say anything bad about him. And it was his reign from 457, these 17 years. Oh, and I forgot one thing. He got rid of Aspar. Aspar was the Germanic intruder, the Germanic subversion in the East. He was a bit like the counterpart of Ricimer. He was the Ricimer of the East, but not as bad as Ricimer. He was much better than Ricimer. But he killed Aspar, thus ending the Germanic influence. He rid the East of the Germanic subversion, guys. Think about this. This is huge. Ridding the East of the Germanic subversion, that is like a huge accomplishment in itself. And the only bad thing, I could imagine also putting him in great, because it was basically his lack of foresight for choosing Basiliscus as, you know, the commander of the fleet at Cape Bon. But I'm kind of comparing him to his peers, and I think he tried everything in his power, and his lasting legacy is, yes, he was not able to save the West, but again, that's not his fault. He was old by that time. The guy was, I think he died at the age of 74. Friends, he was like in his 60s at that time. He cannot go into war like himself and lead a huge army with 60, 65, 70. So, but he tried everything, and he had to choose generals, and of course he was unlucky with Basiliscus. So that's the only bad thing I can say about him, So I will put him in excellent. I will put him in excellent. Glucerius, we don't know much about Glucerius. Glucerius was Roman emperor only for a very short while, and then one of the last actions of Leo I, he sent Nepos to the west, again trying to save the west after all these disasters, again sending Nepos to the west with an army and deposing Glucerius. And Glucerius could possibly have been a puppet of Gundobad, the successor of Ricimer. And when Nepos landed in Italy, Gundobad withdrew. Like, Gundobad fled to his Burgundian buddies, Gundobad, terrible person, by the way, a complete psychopath, like Ricimer, like his uncle Ricimer, a complete psychopath as well, a completely insane and brutal guy. There's not much we can say about Glucerius, but his lasting legacy, he didn't do much. I might even put him in unrankable, because we just don't know anything about him, and he just reigned for a very short time. But then again, he didn't manage to do anything good for the West. So I probably will put him in bad as well, because what was his legacy? He didn't manage to do anything for the Western Roman Empire, basically. Didn't manage to do anything. Okay? So, yeah, that was here the son of Leo I, I think. He died very young. We cannot rank him. And now Basiliscus, guys. Let's do this fast. Terrible. Basiliscus, a complete idiot. He was the guy who failed at Cape Bon, and then he usurps Zeno. He even usurps the Roman Emperor Zeno, the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno. For what? Because of his usurpation in 475, Zeno has to fight in the East. There's civil war in the East because of the idiotic usurpation of Basiliscus. And that's the reason why Zeno could not help the West so much, because he was constantly preoccupied with civil wars in the East. And Basiliscus is the reason why. Basiliscus fails like an idiot at Cape Bon and usurps power in the East against Zeno, basically being the reason why Zeno cannot help the West. Basically then, Basiliscus basically is the bane of the Western Roman Empire. He was the reason why they lost at Cape Bon, and he's again the reason why Zeno cannot then help the Western Roman Empire. He just massively destroyed the Western Roman Empire in crazy ways. So there's nothing good we can say about this guy. Romulus Augustulus, man, he was a kid. It's unrankable. He was a kid. He was like installed by his father Flavius Orestes, who when Nepos made Orestes Magister Militum, which is a bad decision by Nepos, by the way, and we cannot blame Romulus Augustulus or Romulus Augustus. Augustulus is actually making fun of him, it's translated as the small Augustus. So Romulus Augustus, as it would be correct, was 15 or 16 years old when he was deposed by Odoacer. What could the guy have done? Nothing. Unrankable for me. Julius Nepos, oh man, he's a mixed bag. On the one hand, he did some good stuff. On the one hand, he got rid of, when he landed in Italy with an Eastern Roman army, sent one of the last things that the Eastern Roman Emperor Leo I did, sending Nepos to the west. Gundobad fled to the Burgundians and thus deposing Lucerius and thus basically freeing Italy. He freed Italy from the Germanic subversion, okay? So for a very short time, we had the funny situation that finally the Western Roman Empire was freed of Ricimer, who died in 472. Finally it was freed of Gundobad. No more Germanic generals basically subverting the Western Roman Empire. But that was only a brief snapshot. Because Nepos, in his folly, he replaces the pretty capable Magister Militum Ecdicius, who was in those times Magister Militum, with Flavius Orestes. A terrible mistake, as we should see. A terrible mistake. Again, poor judge of character. Because Orestes immediately rebels against Nepos. Immediately. You know? Poor judge of character. So, Nepos, maybe he had some good intentions. Maybe he thought Orestes was a capable guy, but poor judge of character, and that's basically the reason why the West then fell. That's the reason why the West fell, because Orestes claims power, you know, and then Odoacer basically usurps Orestes. So if Nepos wouldn't have replaced Ecdicius with Orestes, then maybe the whole situation would have developed differently. Because Ecdicius was a really capable guy. This guy fought against the Visigoths. At one point, there's this crazy story, Ecdicius fighting against the Visigoths with 18 horsemen. I repeat, 18. Not 1,000, not 100, 18. He didn't have nothing to work with. He had nothing to work with and still was capable to defend Arelate and many cities in those times against the advancing Visigoths. Think about this. He was like a guerrilla fighter. He was using stuff. He was working with nothing. He was a handful of people who were fighting against the Visigothic army. If that isn't heroic, I don't know what heroic means. This is insane. And he's replacing this guy, Nepos. You're replacing this hero with Orestes? So I cannot. Maybe he had some good intentions, but I'm sorry, I have to judge him upon what happened. And later he was not able to reconquer Italy. He fled from Italy when the rebellion of Orestes happened. He fled to Dalmatia and tried to get support from the east. But of course, now that Leo I died in 474, and then Zeno came, and then immediately Basiliscus, the idiot, rebelled against Zeno. Zeno did not have the power, not have the manpower to send help to the west. And remember, the east was in pretty bad shape from Cape Bon. It bankrupted the Eastern Roman Empire to a certain extent, and Zeno did not have the capacity then anymore with the usurpation of Basiliscus to help the west. This is really bad. Okay? So, man, I mean, and then Nepos just wasn't able to, he was never able to reconquer Italy. Probably he tried. Probably in 480, there are some rumors that this was the reason why he was killed in 480. He still was the de facto Western Roman Emperor until 480, even after Odoacer took over power. Okay? He was the de facto Western Roman Emperor. So, but what was his legacy? He didn't achieve anything. He didn't achieve, he ousted he ended the subversion of the Germanic Magister Militums, yes, but it was a brief snapshot, because then Odoacer came and completely got rid of the institution of Western Roman emperors altogether. And he was never able to reconquer Italy, so I cannot rank him very high. I'm sorry, I can't. Even though he might have been per se a good guy who really tried to restore the West, but he was not really able to do so in any way. Not at all. Okay? So, and I think he even made concessions to the Visigoths, like giving them territories like, I think Arelate fell under the reign of Nepos, if I'm not 100% mistaken. So I don't see the many good things that Julius Nepos did, you know? And it was basically his poor judgment that basically allowed Orestes to rebel, and which then in turn led to Odoacer, to the rise of Odoacer. So, yeah. So, friends, that's it. I would say I've rambled again for far too long. Oh my god, 1.5 hours. I have no idea who will watch this. I don't think many people will watch this video, but I'm just making these videos from time to time, you know, so that you see some unscripted stuff from me, some just like ramblings that you can, maybe it's interesting for you to, maybe you learn some things, or maybe it's interesting to see how I think, even though most likely you will not agree with me on everything, because remember, ranking Roman emperors is probably the most subjective thing ever. This is the definition of subjectivity. This is super subjective. Like, everyone does it based on, in a certain sense, to a certain extent, based on personal biases, based on a lack of full knowledge. We don't know everything that happened, and I also don't know all the sources. I don't know everything by heart, okay? So we always judge everything based on incomplete data. But that is true for everything. Like, for politics, for instance, or for the complexity of the world, we judge everything based normally on an incomplete data set, which then very often will lead us to wrong conclusions. So I'm not saying here that my ranking is perfect. I might have ranked in a way that you wouldn't agree on, which is fine. Please write in the comments how your ranking would look for those 100 years, about 100 years from Valentinian I until the fall in quotation marks of the West, because we know in 476 the West did not really fall. Nothing changed in Rome. Rome didn't suddenly miraculously burn or whatever. The infrastructure, the buildings looked in 500 AD, 520 AD, probably even better than in 470 AD, you know, because Theodoric had many buildings repaired later, and actually there was some sort of like mini golden age on the Ostrogothic kingdom. So the West did not fall in 476, but it's like this symbolic date which I now chose as the time period, those 100 years from Valentinian I, when the West was still stronger than the East, until the fall of the West, when, of course, the West was absolutely not strong anymore, and the East was the new powerhouse, you know? So these 100 years are interesting for me, and I hope you found it as well interesting. Now I've really rambled for too long. I apologize for this long video. I hope you still found it some kind of, maybe you found it interesting in a way. I really enjoy doing this from time to time, you know. I'm still, of course, working on the main videos, but these are just like videos which might be interesting to you, because then you see how I am as a person, how I really talk, not non-scripted and so on. So yeah, I will do this from time to time. I hope you had some fun, friends, and then see you in the next main video. I wish you a nice day wherever you are, and see you next time. Bye!